Good afternoon and welcome to the Department of Family and Support Services Summer Youth Employment Program RFP webinar. Just a few housekeeping rules. This webinar is being recorded, and due to the large number of participants, everyone has been placed on mute. Please submit questions using the questions box, and we will address them after reviewing the slides. Please use the questions box to notify us of any technical issues. A copy of the recording will be posted on the DFSS YouTube channel with a link to the recording, and a PDF of the slides will be posted to the DFSS webpage at chicago.gov under the alerts and/or funding opportunity tabs. This will take up to 5 business days. DFSS retains the right to share a list of registrants to this webinar along with their contact and organizational information at our discretion. My name is Jillian Black. I am the Procurement Proposal Coordinator, and I will give the Youth Department an opportunity to introduce themselves.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Evelyn Benitez, and I am with the Chicago Department of Family and Support Services. I am the Youth Services Coordinator that oversees the Summer Youth Employment Program. So welcome to our webinar. We are super excited to share the RFP is out, and we will spend time this afternoon reviewing it. I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Corey.
Hi, everybody.
Sorry about that, folks, but Corey Booker is on as well. She is the Youth Services Coordinator that works on Chicago Ability. So if you were in our Chicago Ability webinar earlier today, Corey Booker will be my support for today's webinar. And I'm going to pass it over to John Weber.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is John Weber. I'm the Senior Director of Operations for the Youth Services Division at DFSS. Just want to say welcome to everyone. Really happy that you're here and excited that you're interested in this opportunity and looking forward to the presentation and questions this afternoon. I'll pass it to my colleague, Graham.
All right. Hello, good afternoon. Happy Friday Eve, everybody. Thanks for spending part of your Thursday with us. My name is Graham Salinger, and I'm a project manager on the youth employment team.
And with that being said, I will go through the agenda. We will start with the purpose of the RFP. We will next go into the background, the program description and goals, the program eligibility, current state and priorities for improvement, performance goals and outcomes, the selection criteria, the timeline, technical assistance for applicants and e-procurement, and then one last round for questions. And with that being said, I'll turn it over to the youth team to discuss the purpose of the RFP.
Thank you so much, Jill. Again, good afternoon, everyone. We are excited to finally release the Summer Youth Employment Program RFP. So just for context, if you're not familiar with our department, we are the Human Services Department of the City of Chicago. Today, we are going to talk about what types of organizations we're looking for. We're looking for folks to fund experienced agencies to administer subsidized youth employment programs or specialized training programs for Chicago youth ages 16 to 24 in Chicago. And I'm going to stress, we serve young people in the city of Chicago who are encountering various employment barriers. The Summer Youth Employment Program aims to provide meaningful employment opportunities by exposing youth to a range of public and private sector industries. The program focuses on providing hands-on job training, skills development, and pathways to permanent employment, thereby enhancing self-efficacy and equipping youth with essential work experiences and skills for long-term success. The Summer Youth Employment Program will be delivered over a 6-week period during the summer which DFSS will subsidize the youth wages at the minimum wage rate for up to 120 hours. Next slide. Background. So I want to share something that I'm very proud of as somebody who's been running the Summer Youth Employment Program over the years. We are the second largest youth employment program in the country. And I'm going to say that again, folks. We are the second largest youth employment program in the country. Last year, we served 27,793 through the Department of Family Support Services, as well as some of our sister and partner agencies. So last year, specifically for DFSS, under the SYEP program, we put 11,690 youth to work, ages 16 to 24, with 41 delegate agencies. And during the summer, there were 16,946 job placements and specialized training work sites to provide and enhance technical and soft skills. Now, I also want to note this includes our Chicago Ability youth that were a part of this program. Ultimately, we were looking to improve employment readiness, financial literacy, and really preparing our young people for long-term success in future careers and pathways. Now, we also want to flag, as we are now in 2025, we do have American Rescue Plan funds as a part of our program. And so some of our opportunities were slightly reduced. And so for 2025 and 2026, DFSS anticipates serving about 10,450 youth across 73 agencies for the next couple of years. And we'll talk further about this throughout the presentation today. The number of opportunities will vary depending on size of the proposed programs. Additional awards may be made through this request for proposal if additional funding becomes available. So please keep that in mind. Next slide. Program goals. So we have 5 program goals that we want you to really read, digest, and as you're thinking about responding to this RFP, these are the 5 goals that need to be implemented and integrated in the RFP. So the first one is facilitate meaningful employment. We want to see our young people placed in job placements or specialized training programs that really provide young people the opportunity to view different types of public or private sector industries. We want them to gain valuable work experiences. So throughout the presentation, I'll give more detail about that, but just a couple of things to call out. We sometimes place young people in our city departments. Sometimes young people are working in summer camps. Sometimes we have young people that are interested in becoming nonprofit employees, such as yourselves that are on this call. So we're really looking for SYEP to be that opportunity for young people to participate in meaningful employment. The second one is promoting comprehensive skills development. So we want to make sure that the program delivers and supports mental health, enhances career readiness, and develop essential skills needed for young people to be empowered and to achieve long-term success and well-being. Please don't panic about this goal, because there are things that we will discuss later on in our My Shy, My Future playlist that will integrate some of the skills development, but also some of you, please keep in mind that you run multiple workforce development and youth development programs. So we're really looking to elevate young people's skill sets. The third goal is integrating mental health education. So kind of in alignment with our skills development, in our My Shy, My Future playlist, we will have some components and elements to really create safe and supportive environments for our young people, right? So we want to make sure that they learn some coping skills, they have access to resources. And again, although this will be in our playlist, we want to make sure that organizations have partnerships and supports. And some of you are experts in this already, but we want to make sure that our young people are feeling supported and are feeling safe and just understanding we want them to succeed in the program. The fourth one is we've increased a focus on our target populations. And I'll talk a little bit more about this when we get to that section, but we want to make sure that we have an executed targeted recruitment strategy where 55% of the young people that you are working with will fall under these specified target populations. And then there are 4 priority populations that we'll talk about that we want to make sure that young people are being served and met through the program. And then lastly, we want to make sure that there's a way to create a pathway to permanent employment. And so we want to see responses where folks are working collaboratively with work sites and employers that may have the opportunity to provide permanent positions for young people that demonstrate strong performance and potential. We're really seeking to see at least 10% of the young people that you're working with that will have the opportunity to be placed in a subsidized placement permanent role by a work site or partner that you have at the end of the program. And then we'll talk furthermore about documenting and tracking that the number of successful placements. Next slide. So the program description. So this is kind of a high level. We're really looking for experienced agencies to administer subsidized youth employment programs or specialized programs, again, for young people ages 16 to 24. The approach is that we have seen cohorted models. So if you're running a training program or you have a work site that will tell you, I want to work with 20 of your young people and here are the opportunities that I have, that is definitely allowed. On the other side, you may have a training program. You decide, I am doing a coding program that will require 20 youth that are working with an instructor that will learn coding, project management, design, and at the end of the program, they are actually creating an app. So just using that as an example. The other side to this employment approach is also individual. So agencies that may have work sites that they work with, and I'll call some out that we worked with over the years. Sometimes we have young people that are working at Walgreens. Sometimes you have young people that are working at different city departments. We want to make sure that as you are writing your responses to this RFP, that you talk about the types of experiences that the youth will be in. So you may speak to placing youth in different types of public or private sectors, or you may talk about running a training program. Either way, both types of approaches, we will be looking for that throughout the responses. The ratio. So this program starts with 50 youth. So when I talk about the budget and things later on, just things to consider, we're looking for 2 coordinators or instructors, because again, it's either you're running an employment, a specialized program, or you're placing young people at work sites. We want to make sure that there's 2 coordinators or instructors per 50 youth. Now, if you want to apply for additional youth, we're looking at increments of 25. So you could either apply for 50, 75, 100, 125, etc. But again, the ratio is the additional 25, and the ratio is a 1 to 25 ratio staff to young people. And I kind of mentioned this already under the employment approach, but just kind of some of the program examples. We've had young people that were teacher assistants at schools during the summer. We've had young people working at tech companies. We've had young people working in corporate offices, and again, some of our government agencies, City Hall, etc. The recruitment, and some of this may sound repetitive, but we just want to make sure that people understand what our priorities are. And so with the recruitment, 55% of the youth will identify with at least one of the target populations, which I'll talk about in the next slide. Referral sources. Now, the folks that are on this call, just think about different entities that you work with. Talk about who you have done partnerships with, who you recruited with, programs that you may have in schools. Some of you may be child welfare agencies. Some of you are working with the police department, probation. So think about referral sources where you can attain some of the young people. Program schedule, and this is general both for Chicago Ability, I'm going to call that out, and for SYEP. The expectation is that the young people are working 120 hours total. So this will be 20 hours a week for 6 weeks. Budget categories. The budget categories include the youth wages, the youth coordinators and or instructors, transportation, supplies, and administration. And we will cover that a little bit later in the presentation. The thing I do want to highlight, and this will really excite young people, this year we are paying $16.60. So the youth, we are paying with the city's minimum wages. And this also includes FICA, so your Social Security and Medicare and workers' comp. And again, 20 hours a week for 6 weeks. Staff wages, this is another thing to call out. Your folks will be excited to see this. DFSS wanted to prioritize and understand that as the youth wages are going up, we wanted to make sure that we were paying a livable wage for our staff. So you'll notice that the staff can make $25.35 per hour. And also we added FICA and workers' comp. We'll talk a little bit more about that later on, but the expectation is that they work about 25 hours per week for 8 weeks. Next slide. Target population. So let's get into the target population. A couple of changes that I want to note for folks. People who were previously funded in 2022 may notice that we have increased the target population from 50% to 55%. And the reason for this is because we wanted to address the needs of young people in Chicago. And so in looking at this outline, understanding that we are still prioritizing young people in care or foster care, we're looking to work with young people that are opportunity youth. So this is defined as out of school, out of work. Youth that are experiencing homelessness or that are unstably housed, youth involved in the justice system, youth with disabilities, youth who are English as a second language learner. A new target population you'll notice is the youth residing in the census tract for Chicago that are below the 150% of the city of Chicago average on the economic hardship index. Folks, don't panic. We replaced the level 2 and level 3 ratings with the economic hardship index. It will populate on the back end in our system. So there isn't anything different that you need to do. But if you're interested in learning more about this economic hardship, please check out the link embedded in this presentation. What I'd also want to call out, although these are our 7 target population priorities, 4 of them, we are seeking at least 10% fall within the target population. So we are prioritizing youth in care. So these are our foster care youth, youth experiencing homelessness or housing instability, youth involved in the justice system, and opportunity youth, again, defined as out of school, out of work. Next slide. Partnerships. So I just talked about the folks that we plan to work with as a part of the program this summer. Things to consider, and if you were in our Chicago Ability webinar earlier, we were really encouraging folks, you know who your partners are currently, but just other folks to think about when you want to create and run a program to serve the youth that we want to support. Places to think about and institutions are child welfare agencies. Some of you are actually licensed child welfare agencies. So think about, as you're creating your response to this RFP, think about some of those young people that could benefit from this employment program. Chicago Public Schools. Now, although we know Chicago Public Schools is huge, when you're thinking about your responses, please don't just put Chicago Public Schools, but if there are particular schools that you're working with, make sure you include that in your proposals. Faith-based organizations. We have a lot of faith-based organizations throughout the city. you have your churches and actual nonprofits that are faith-based, please reach out to those folks. We have our mental health organizations, street outreach programs, pretty self-explanatory, the police department and other community-based organizations. Again, looking at our Cook County Juvenile Probation, our mayor's office with people with disability, and lastly, even DFSS. Some of you have programs within the department. I stated earlier, we are the Human Services Department of the City of Chicago, which entails our Youth Services Division, our Children's Services Division, our Homeless Division, Senior Services, as well as Workforce divisions. So as you're thinking about how you're promoting the SYEP program or One Summer Chicago in general, these are some partners to consider for those recruitments. Next slide. Priorities for improvement. So as we released this RFP for 2025, there were a couple of things that we took into consideration. We wanted to make sure that we were helping youth overcome obstacles to personal growth and really prepare for future employment. So there are two components that DFSS is adding to the curriculum, which I kind of alluded to earlier. The first one is the motivation and mental health awareness. DFSS will raise the awareness to the importance of self-care and mental health management, including recognizing maladaptive behaviors and learning healthy coping skills. This will be included within and integrated in the My Shy My Future playlist. Please don't confuse the My Shy My Future playlist for the My Shy My Future app. Those are two different things. But the playlist, which you will receive upon when you're awarded, there will be training on our playlist, and this component will be added. So don't stress out about it. The second thing is our structured implementation. And so we're seeking our agencies to dedicate time to these components in a structure where during weeks 2 through 5, that you add 5 hours a week to enhance their curriculum. For week 1 and 6, the hours can be flexible. Now, I know some of you are thinking, well, Evelyn, I have a training program that has a set schedule, or I have work sites that are seeking the young people for the entire time. Upon award, I will say that although these things are required per our contract, there is some flexibility on how you implement this. But again, we wanted to provide a framework of how you deliver the curriculum. But note that if you have additional curriculum at your organization, you can incorporate that. We just want to make sure that the young people are completing the playlists that are required, which is our work readiness, our financial literacy, and now this mental health component that will be integrated. So don't stress out. And then lastly, we want to prevent young people from repeating the same activities. So there's kind of 3 levels to these playlists. And again, there will be training to cover this. We're looking for foundational, intermediate, and advanced development. And youth must successfully complete 85% of the curriculum before advancing to the next level. Again, this will be covered in training. Next slide. The use of best practices. And so understanding that the folks that are on this call, we are looking for youth development and workforce development type practitioners. So we're also requesting that selected respondents implement the following elements. For the first one, the individual placement and support, the IPS. It's an evidence-based employment model built on 8 principles. It's designed to help individuals who traditionally face barriers to employment and maintain jobs. There is a link provided in the presentation, so please take a look at that. As you're thinking about your responses, again, implementing portions of this to support, because ultimately, folks, what we're looking for is that we have programs that are empowering, that are supporting, that are developing our young people to be successful in their placements. So this is just an additional tool. The second thing are employer partnerships. So we want to make sure that respondents have established partnerships with employment programs, employers, educational institutions, other community agencies, or that can build and nurture these partnerships to create a collaborative network for youth to be hired. So again, we want to make sure that these are really meaningful experiences. And notice it's even broader than my previous examples, but think about the types of job training programs or placements that will really elevate and expose our young people to different types of industries. The third one is the comprehensive support services. And so in thinking about designing your program, please look for employers or workforce organizations that also have some sort of element. Now, you may think, well, what do you mean wraparound services if I'm working at Walgreens? Now, we understand that traditional job placements, we want the young people to gain skills, but in thinking about longer term placements, think about partnerships that may have coaching as a part of their work style, or think about MOUs or linkages of case management agencies that could support a young person, or maybe it's even within your own organization that may have coaching as a part of a program, maybe not necessarily the SYEP program. I'll use this example loosely, but you may be a WIOA agency that has case management or job developers that are working with your young people, but then you also have a slew of services that will ensure that they're successful. So we're really looking for folks to provide robust and comprehensive responses to really support the success for our young people. Next slide. Now the program requirements. Now, if you had a chance to review this, it's on pages 18 to 23. I'm not going to read this verbatim, but what I will do is highlight things that I think are really important for the responses that we're looking for in this proposal. So number one, we want to make sure that you are recruiting and supporting young people. So as I stated earlier, the program starts with 50 youth. We want to make sure that you are that you are recruiting all 50 young people. Now, what does that mean? You have a contract with DFSS. You are responsible for hiring 50 young people. They have to, this is not a negotiable. They have to complete the online One Summer Chicago application, and they must reside in the city of Chicago. This program is not to be serving young people in Cook County or in the suburbs. We only serve youth in Chicago. You will be responsible for 50% of that contract. So that means 25 young people can be in your existing programs. They could be referrals that you're getting from your partners. Meanwhile, the other 50% will be randomly selected through the One Summer Chicago application pool, or as we refer to it as our lottery. And so for those who have been previously funded with us, this isn't anything new. We've always tried to promote and ensure that young people have, because we have youth in Chicago that may or may not be connected to your organizations. And so we want to make sure that the lottery is available. And so any young person in the city of Chicago, ages 16 to 24, when they apply for One Summer Chicago, they will be in our application pool, which on the back end will feed into our database system, which I'll talk about later on. But again, just a reminder, we want to make sure that you have a coordinated outreach and recruitment effort. So in your proposals, don't tell us we're just going to recruit young people with flyers. No, explain what your recruitment strategies are. Develop and engage youth in job placement or specialized program. So again, talk about what those supports are. Provide an orientation for youth and their parents, especially if they're under 18. We want to make sure that young people understand what it is that they're going to do this summer. Track and enter data into our DFSS data management system. Typically, it is our CitySpan Yes system. So please make sure that if you're an awarded agency, that you are following these things. And then just other examples, providing supports for young people to obtain their state IDs, or even walking them through the process, because again, now this is an employment program that we pay wages. So we want to make sure that young people have the things they need to work. And then of course, youth are expected to work at the start of the program. Right now, we don't have a date yet. It is in process, but just making sure that as you're working with your young people and you're going through your onboarding process, that they are prepared. And again, when we have our kickoff later on, once you're awarded, we'll get into those specifics. And again, just kind of reiterating, utilize your institutions such as our child welfare agencies, Chicago Public School, mental health organizations. I'm not going to read the rest, but we just want to make sure that with the timing of things, there are a lot of different institutions that work with young people. So please make sure you talk about that in your proposal. Next slide. Partnership and monitoring of work sites. So we want to make sure that young people, again, going back to our original goal of meaningful work experiences. So we want to make sure that respondents partner with work sites or specialized training programs with a variety of industries. We want to make sure that they are truly committed to providing a robust experience for the young people. These work sites and training programs need to foster youth experiences and exploring career interests, assisting in developing skills, and gaining a certificate if applicable. Um, Last year, I'll give you an example. I had an agency that did a food sanitation certification. It was great. They had a catering program that partnered with the agency. And so the young people actually went through modules to be certified and actually catered events. So that's just an example of the types of opportunities we're looking for. In addition, respondents must provide ongoing communication and monitoring to ensure young people are gaining meaningful employment. So make sure you're checking in with your work sites. Make sure you're checking in with your training programs. Even if you're the work site yourself, please make sure that you are constantly in communication with your coordinators or the instructors, that the young people are really in the program that is benefiting them. And then just things to think about, right? So we want to see a wide spectrum of opportunities, again, in public to private sectors. If you have partnerships with providers that have a robust training program, it'd be great to see young people get a certificate or credential. Partner with other community-based organizations that could provide meaningful work experiences. Sometimes I see young people working in nonprofits that have a tech focus or an art focus. And long time ago, somebody had made a comment like, well, art really doesn't pay. Well, let me tell you, there are some art organizations that have phenomenal artists, and there are young people that are truly talented that didn't think that they couldn't make that as a career. Well, some of those young people I've met over the years are now art directors or even working at museums. So really be creative in thinking about what those partnerships and work sites look like. Awarded respondents, and this is usually a question, can you be a work site or host young people at your agency? Of course you can. And if you're an agency that happens to have a specialized program in-house, can those young people be a part of it? They most certainly can. And then lastly, just make sure that you're also hosting a worksite orientation with your work sites. And so typically, like every year, there's a couple of organizations who actually invited me out to go see their worksite orientation. And it's great because they go through the do's and don'ts and the programmatic requirements. But then, like, just as the funder, they wanted me to be there just in case there was like any additional questions, which I thought was neat. But again, there was no confusion. Everything was asked and answered, and it was very clear what the expectations are. So please make sure you're hosting those worksite orientations. Next slide. The third point is delivering the online training. So all programs are required to facilitate an online curriculum, skill building, training, and financial capability training modules through My Shine My Future. So earlier I stated, don't confuse the My Shine My Future app, because there isn't a functional app that young people use to find programs in the city. This one is the My Shine My Future playlist that is managed and curated by DFSS, and it is a digital platform that's designed to develop skills and prepare young people for employment, including soft skills development and financial lit. The trainings will be hosted by DFSS. So if you are an awarded agency and you've never done business with the city, again, please don't panic. We will be here to support you and walk you through the process. But just to give you some elements of that, The workforce training modules are provided to help youth facilitate access to online career exploration and financial capabilities modules, track youth participation in the My Shine My Future platform, and then entering information into CitySpan. Again, we call it out just so that you're aware that this is a contractual and programmatic requirement, but we will train and support you through this process. Next slide. Number 4, recruiting, hiring, and managing staff. So as I stated earlier, this program, we start with 50 young people, so there are 2 staff attached. So depending on how you plan to submit your proposal for SYEP, if you're doing traditional placement, so let's say you decide to submit an application for 50 young people, you're gonna have 2 coordinators that will follow each 25 young people and make sure they're submitting their timesheets, they understand their responsibilities at the work site. Now I'm going to flip the script. If you're an agency that plans to do an employment training program or a specialized training program, be it at your agency or with a partner, making sure that you have an instructor, and this applies to both the coordinator, the instructor, and we also use leadership coach. We want to make sure that these are people that are positive, enthusiastic, civic-minded. Ultimately, people, make sure you have staff that like young people. And I know everybody laughs at me every year when I say this, because I will say this in our CitySpan training. I will say this publicly. I will say it in all the trainings. The thing that's so important and instrumental as someone who's been here a very long time is that young people will pick up on the very supportive staff who are the positive relationships with either supportive staff or not. So you don't have to be loud like me. You can be very chilled, very calm, but if you genuinely want to engage and are inspired to work with young people, those are the folks you want. Don't be those folks that won't talk to the young people. Give the young people attitude. They pick up on that. And I will tell you, young people will do everything they want to be successful when they are feeling supported. So folks, I can't stress that enough. Please make sure you hire people that genuinely like young people. Make sure that you, as you're hiring these folks, that they're going to manage the program from the kickoff to completion. So meaning we know that based on the budget, which I'll talk about later, you may have staff that are part of your organization. So you may use existing staff to work on the program, fine. Or you may have seasonal staff. But regardless, that right before the program starts, make sure you have those staff ready to go, that they understand the culture of your organization, but what the expectations are to support the young people. Now, as you're working with these coordinators or instructors, you just want to make sure that whatever types of projects and programs that you're working on, so again, job placements or specialized program, that they are supporting the youth throughout. The big thing I need to highlight is just making sure that as we outlined the target populations earlier, that these folks are properly trained and have a clear background check on file. I don't want to hear about young people, or excuse me, about staff that are working with young people that do not have a background check. They must have a clear background check on file with your agency prior to working the program. And then lastly, they should be supporting your organizations as far as like collecting timesheets, specifically the coordinators and leadership coaches, making sure that you're not exceeding their rate. But the other piece is just making sure that they're collecting timesheets and providing that information back to your organizations. And then just a reminder that the ratio, that should say 2 to 50, not 2 to 25. Sorry about that typo. And then the types of experiences that we're looking for, the roles and responsibilities, the youth coordinator and leadership coaches descriptions can be found on pages 21 and 22. John Weber, I see you. Is there a question?
No question. I had to step away and have just rejoined.
Oh, okay, perfect. Thank you for rejoining. Next slide. Number 5, match youth with employment placement or specialized training program based on their demonstrated interest and skills. So folks, I want to tell you, this is one where I talked to some of the other cities across the country, and most folks do grapple with this, and that's okay. I think what's really important that as you're providing and preparing your responses for this RFP, that you try to have an array of opportunities that young people would be interested in. Read reports, like the Department of Labor does put out reports about just trends, what adults are doing. But at some point, I can tell you that even the Chicago Cook Workforce Partnership has put out some data of what youth are interested in. So I would recommend looking at their website, but really trying to match young people as much as possible to the things that they're interested in. And so, although we know that you may have just some specific programs, but I think it's also being flexible and even exposing young people to the thing that they may not know that they were interested in. And I'll give you an example. Years ago, we had a young woman, um, barely got her GED. She loved to design, but would have never thought about a coding program. And so, and she talked about how she wasn't that great in math. She didn't understand like string. And so when she went through the program, it was actually kind of like the last offering that the agency had. But they told her, give it a try. Like we'll provide supports. And so she partnered up with a couple of folks. And as she was going through it, the way her brain thought, she kept talking about like designing like this app, like the visual aspect of it. Well, the other two folks were really more the technical people. It actually worked out well. And then lo and behold, they presented at the Apple store on Michigan Ave. So here's somebody who never thought of wanting to do a coding program. And then they were part of the top 4 teams that presented. So again, as much as we'd like to see youth matched as much as possible to their interests and skills, we understand that sometimes that can be challenging, but try to have an array of response of opportunities. And some of this is actually captured in the One Summer Chicago application. We have a whole section dedicated. And I will recommend that if you are an awarded agency, later on when the application is open, I always tell folks, create a test account just so you can see what the young people are completing. And then just finally, if you have a matching tool in-house or like some sort of assessment, please incorporate that and talk about that in your proposal so that then we can see, you know, how you are working with the young people. Next slide. Administering payroll. So I'd like to call out agencies who were previously funded with DFSS. There were some of you that I actually did your payroll. If you haven't noticed already, this year there is not a centralized payroll option in this RFP cycle. So just things to consider, have a line of credit available, maintain a separate account for youth and staff wages for at least 60 days. So this is, it's not on the slide, but I'm publicly saying that because if you notice, if you looked at the budget and you look at the youth wages, the majority of the contract itself is actually the youth wages. So because we're paying young people $16.60, and there's also obviously the FICA and the Medicare, we're looking at close to $2,000 per youth. So if you do 2,000 or even 1992 times 50, that's a substantial chunk. So please, the thing we don't like to hear, and it happens, people will call the One Summer Chicago hotline, which comes to DFSS. And the thing that people will complain about, parents and young people or guardians, is that young people weren't paid on time. So if you're thinking about applying for SYEP, please make sure you have the wages available. Now, you'll also notice what I have in bold. Wages must be directly paid by respondents or their fiscal agent. So if you're an organization that can tell me, I have an amazing program, but my finances aren't so strong, feel free to look for a fiscal agent, have them apply for this grant. Let them be the folks that worry about the youth wages and the staff coordinators, like the administrative or as we like to refer to it as the back office. And you can be the group that actually runs the program, places the young people, or runs a training program. So just a couple of things to think about as we're going through this RFP. The youth wages must be a part of the proposed budget. And so a question that I always get, Evelyn, do I have to show the youth wages under personnel? No, that is a separate section. Personnel is for the adult staff or people that are either hourly or salaried staff for an organization. The youth wages are shown separately. Things that's important to know for the youth payroll, just making sure that if you're working with work sites that you're collecting timesheets and that you're putting that into your payroll system. But in addition, you have to make sure that it is in hours being city span. And really just ensuring that young people are paid at least on a bi-weekly basis, regardless of whatever payroll system that you are using. Give me 1 second. There we go. Regardless of what payroll system you're using, just make sure that it is providing access and that youth are paid in a timely fashion. Now, some of you may align this with your payroll, your pay period, and that's perfectly fine, but we just want to make sure that youth are paid at least bi-weekly. I've seen folks do it weekly, but I don't want to hear is that youth are being paid once a month. Like that will not fly for the program. Something that I also want to note, that all these employment initiatives will operate on a reimbursement basis. So youth payroll can be managed by you or a fiscal agent, but just make sure that you demonstrate the ability to administer payroll and ensure timely payment to you through your timekeeping system, and still have the capacity to cover for at least 60 days before city reimbursement. And I'll talk about this a little bit later. Next slide. The performance goals and outcomes. And so what we're looking to do is we want to monitor a set of outputs and outcome metrics. So in this case, there's kind of a combination of City of Chicago corporate funds and the American Rescue Plan. So respondents must be able to report metrics by funding type. So at this point in preparation, this is an exercise, right? So when you're working on your budget, like I don't want you to get caught up in, well, am I ARP or am I corporate? No, we still want you to complete your budget, but for the purposes of the goals and the outcomes, there's some language we have in there just in case we need it. So I'll go through these. We want to make sure that 100% of youth will be recruited and placed in employment or attend a training program identified by the agency and entered by the agency in city span. So we already talked about the different opportunities. 10% of these youth will transition to long-term employment, post-secondary or vocational program or military. So again, although we know SYEP is a 6-week program, because of the age range of 16 to 24, you may have some older youth that are looking for something more permanent. So as you're writing your proposal and if you are awarded, think about the types of experiences and partnerships that you'll have to get at least 10% of those youth to attain long-term employment. The 55% of youth will identify with target population criteria, and 10% of those will identify with one of the 4 high priority populations. So we already covered that. So out of your 55% of that target pop, 10% will fall under the 4. Again, foster care, youth unhousing state, just involved, or opportunity youth. 85% of the youth will complete the task and playlist via the My Shine My Future platform, which we already covered. 100% of youth will receive additional information, support, or services during and after program completion, if identified and requested during the programming. So again, we want to make sure that as our programs are being rolled out during the summer, that if you have those supports, be it in-house or with your partnerships, we want to make sure that those young people are receiving that. In addition to the performance indicators and outputs listed above, DFSS encourages respondents to propose additional indicators. So having the ability to demonstrate things such as 80% of youth will sign up for direct deposit. Now, folks, I want to really stress this. As a part of an employment program, just generally speaking, most folks do direct deposit. So if I'm a young person that's working at Starbucks or I'm working at McDonald's, chances are they're signing up for direct deposit. Now, some of your organizations may say, well, we do have that option, or we do a paper check, or we use a pay card through our payroll provider. That's perfectly fine. But we really want to encourage young people to have direct deposit. Now, some of you may say, well, we don't have banks or we're not connected. Well, DFSS is very fortunate to partner with the Economic Awareness Council that manages the Bank on Chicago initiative. And so we do have banks that are very youth friendly and a couple of credit unions that are very supportive to young people. So just something to consider. We want to make sure that 80% of youth will complete at least 95% of the available program hours. So as I stated earlier, the program is 120 hours. What we're really looking for, honestly, is the 120 hours. But for us to gauge some sort of success, we're looking that at least 80% of those young people do 114 hours. I even did the math for you. 85% of youth will complete an exit survey at the end of the summer. And don't worry about that. That is something that will be provided by DFSS. 85% of youth will create and upload a resume via the My Shine My Future platform. Again, this is an employment program, folks. We want young people to be able to articulate and demonstrate the types of experiences that they've learned. And then lastly, 100% of youth will be paid on time by the agency's payroll system. Folks, I will tell you, we don't want people calling the hotline because they didn't get paid on time. And if you are awarded, we will ask you for your payroll calendar just so that we have it on hand. Next slide. Now, the good stuff. So I just covered a lot of the programmatic content. Let's talk about what we're looking for as far as guidance. So the city of Chicago, back in 2022, we broke up into 6 healthy equity zones. And so if you're familiar with the Chicago Department of Public Health, this is kind of how we were looking at organizations. And so what we're looking for is respondents to serve an equity zone. So this can be a collaborative application, or this can be you applying as your own organization that you want to serve one of these 6 equity zones. Now, if you are applying for one particular equity zone, so I'll pick on the far south side, and you are trying to provide extensive programming, but you have providers that may be in another equity zone, then I would actually say, why don't you submit 2 applications? Because what we're really looking for is broaden opportunities because we are citywide. And we understand that some of you may serve like 1 or 2 particular community areas, and some of you may have a robust relationship with other community areas. And so for just applying in general, we're looking for folks to submit 1 application per equity zone. We don't want to see folks submitting 2 for the same equity zone. So in that same breath, I said I'd pick on the south side. So if I say far south, I'm agency A, I don't want to see 2 applications for the far south side. I just want to see, or excuse me, the far south equity zone. If I'm agency A and I happen to do business in far south, I'm submitting that application. But if I happen to be an organization that has partnerships in the west equity zone, then I can submit a second application. We don't want to see 2 applications in that far south. And I'm just using that as an example. Respondents seeking funding for multiple sites in different healthy equity zones, as I mentioned, are required to apply for each zone separately. And please note that if you apply for different equity zones, then you must have different user accounts. And I know this will be covered later on in iSupplier, in the iSupplier section. Respondents can only apply for a healthy equity zone in which they can demonstrate a physical address. And so we just want to make sure that as you are applying and creating your proposal, that you are in the equity zone that you plan to serve. But I'll put a caveat, but if you have a MOU or if you're subcontracting with folks in that equity zone you're applying for, please make sure you include that in your proposal, excuse me, you discuss it as well as attach those MOUs. DFSS will make recommendations for contract awards by Chicago Equity Zone, balancing program location, target population, and demonstrated collaborations. The distribution of funds will be based on the demonstrated needs of youth populations as indicated by data from One Summer Chicago applicants over the last 3 years. Next slide. And kind of in the like a continuation of the equity zones. So what you see on slide 21, this is kind of the anticipated range of awards. So we have the 6 equity zones listed. We have the percentage of applicants that we had per zone. So this is actually last year's data. And then just kind of what we're thinking for this year. So again, using the far south side, we're looking to serve 1,700 young people. So because our contracts are, we start with 50 young people, we're anticipating to select 9 to 12 agencies in that equity zone. Near south, you'll notice we're looking to serve 2,900 young people. So again, the increase of agencies could be a range of 15 to 25. I'm not going to read the rest of the chart because it is in the RFP, but just to give you an idea that this chart gives you an idea of what we're prioritizing and how many agencies per equity zone that we will contract with. Something that I want to note for folks is that we're releasing this RFP with a contract term from April 1st, 2025 through December 31st of 2025. This is the contract term. This is different from the budget term. If you are an awarded agency, you will receive a budget and the budget will have a different budget term. Because understanding that, yes, this is a 6-week program. So we know that you are not running SYEP through December 31st. That's not what's happening. You will operate the 6 weeks during the summer, but the contract term is April 1st through 2025. Now, based on needs, DFSS may extend this term for up to 1 additional year, which may be granted twice. Now, this may be a slight change from previous SYEP RFPs. Now, folks, I want to be honest, given the changes in the funding community from the local, state, federal, and philanthropy, generally speaking, now this is Evelyn Benitez, just giving some expertise and just previous experience. This is a time for you to review your own agency's fundraising efforts, grant writing, diversifying your funding streams. As of right now, the way it reads is that we have these contracts through April 1st of 2025 through December 31st. Now, we may opt to extend contracts the following year, but again, that's going to be contingent upon your performance, but also it's going to be contingent on the city's availability of funding. So just keep that in the back of your mind, folks. DFSS anticipates that each award will be between $153,911 to $1.2 million, depending on the size of your proposed program. And again, we anticipate to fund, it could be 53 to 87 agencies, just depending on the number of you folks come back to us with. And in bold, again, this contract will operate on a reimbursement basis. So folks, you have to spend money in order to be reimbursed. The big key that I tell folks is think about that line of credit. Think about your in-kind funds that you may have in-house. And think about just making sure you have cash on hand. And I don't mean on hand like at your organization, but like in the bank that you can float 60 days. That's just kind of a recommended. DFSS, again, budgeting the $153,911 for 50 young people and one coach and or that should have said and or leadership coach. So it's still that 50 youth to 2 staff. And if you want to apply for additional youth, then it's 25. So 50 youth, 75 youth, 100 youth, 125, 150. You understand the example, and that's in increments of $76,956. This total funding cannot exceed $32,167,399. So that is the allocation allocated for SYEP. Next slide. The budget. Now, I gave you some programmatic overview. I just gave you some guidance on what we're looking for in terms of number of agencies by equity zone. Now let's talk about the budget. So what you see on your left-hand side is the chart for 50 young people. So now, if you look at that personnel, and please, like, although it says personnel, when you are completing your budget form, you are not putting the youth under personnel. But I need to call out, 50 young people are being paid at $16.60 an hour. Great. The FICA and workers' comp, we set it at 11%. Now, some folks are kind of like, well, Evelyn, my rate may be lower, it may be higher. So just for the purpose of preparing this budget, because this is not your final program budget. I'm going to say this again. This budget that you're submitting, what we're looking for is that you understand how to prepare a budget, but this will not be the final executed budget. This is an exercise that you understand what the costs are of the program. And so for here, we have the hourly wage of $16.60, the FICA, which is the Medicare and Social Security, and you know that number, that 0.045 and the 0.0145 and then the 0.0645. And then some folks have a range of workers' comp. But we give you we're showing the higher rate of $18.43 for 120 hours. And then the total is $110,000. Like I said earlier, that is the majority of this contract. The second line is the coordinator coach. So here we're just using coordinator coach, but if you're doing instructors, I mean, you could also show that. There's 2 of them at $25.35. And again, we included the FICA, so Social Security and Medicare and workers' comp in the section. And then you see that it's at $28.14 with 200 hours. And that rate comes, that total comes out to $11,256. So anticipating that's about 25 hours a week. Then you'll notice we have supplies listed, transportation. Supplies, there may be things like such as IDs that you may need to buy, or maybe there's like some program supports that the young people may need. So there's $6,000 that's pretty flexible that you can describe in your budget. So we're looking for folks to be comprehensive on what you plan to do with that line. The next line is transportation. So typically we provide transportation. Please note, folks, that in the past we used to do this $29.50, but come to find out that a 7-day pass is actually $20 a week. So you'll notice that we're actually giving transportation for the entire time of the program. And so we understand that we have young people that are going to downtown or traveling to other work sites. So we just want to make sure that that is in the budget. And then you see the total direct cost is $133,836. Now, this indirect cost, the way it's stated here, we refer to that as admin. So again, for the purpose of this exercise, we're using the 15% rate. This is $20,075. Essentially, that is funding that you can utilize to cover additional costs within this program. I'm going to say that again. That $20,075 is to cover costs for this program. I don't want to see folks telling me that this $20,000 is paying for something unrelated to the program. These dollars are to be used for the young people. So for example, you may want to include maybe an additional $3,000 because you know you're going to have a program that requires uniforms. Just using that as an example, you could take that cost out of this 15%. Just an example. And there'll be a little bit more in depth that I'll talk about in the next couple of slides. So next slide. So expenses. So I showed you what we are allocating for the program, that 133,000, but even additional things to consider. So we have salaries, wages, the fringes, so cost of the person that's doing payroll for your organization. Could be your receptionist. It could be, you know what, Evelyn, I see that we're working with these 7 target populations. We want to add a program assistant. Perfect. This is something that you can add to your budget. Operating expenses. So again, think about those direct delivery of programming or services. So sometimes folks are like, well, Evelyn, I need to pay a portion of the rent. That's fine. You're taking that out of that 15% that I showed you in the previous slide. Professional technical services. So expenses of third-party services. So this could be, there is a third-party company that does my taxes that, or processes the payroll. Please include that in the cost. Again, the allocation we provided showed the youth wages, the coordinators, transportation, and supplies, but that's why you have that 15% to cover costs such as this. Transportation, I already told you we provided the 6 weeks for young people, but maybe you want to get a couple of buses because there's going to be an event at the Google Center that you want to take young people to, as long as it is related to the enhancement of workforce development for young people, those types of costs are allowed. I don't want to hear about folks paying for young people to go to Great America. That's not what this program is. So just wanted to call that out as an example. Materials and supplies, again, things that are necessary for the program. Now this valued at 6,000, there's now this, and I'll talk about this in the next slide about the American Rescue Plan funding, what it allows, and our corporate funds. But just note, people, we are not buying buildings. We are not buying vehicles with these dollars. These dollars are to pay for specifically costs related directly to the program. Next slide. And so this is where I wanted to kind of talk about the indirect. So on our budget form, there is an indirect line and there's a 10% de minimis. So if organizations do not have the federal NICRA, then literally they can choose that option and include what those costs are, again, related to the program. Now, because we have blended funding in the SYEP program, we have American Rescue Plan money, there's specific guidance. So just make sure that, and you don't have to worry about this now, but we are flagging it for folks, that if there's any kind of indirect, if you're federally funded, that you fall in accordance with the uniform guidance. There's that 10% de minimis. And when you are awarded, I will make sure that if you're an organization that receives that funds, you will see that in the email, and then just to understand where you put that in your budget. But again, the budget that you're submitting for this proposal is just an exercise that you can demonstrate the ability to show cost. The other bullet for the federal funding is any indirect cost higher than this de minimis requires the negotiated indirect cost rate. So again, the NICRA. So if you are an organization that receives a rate from the Department of Health and Human Services, make sure that it is up to date and that it is current. Now, I've seen in the past where folks would say, well, it's going to expire 6/30/2025, but I don't have the most current besides that one, then I will need a letter on your agency letterhead and or a letter from the Department of Health and Human Services that it's on its way. We will allow for that. What I don't want to see is if you're an organization that has NICRA, that has this negotiated rate, that it is from 2024. So if it says 6/30/2024 and it doesn't say anything else, we will not accept it. The other piece is our corporate funding. And so that allows for us to do up to the 15%. So that 20,075 that I referred to, you can show that throughout your budget. Or if you're awarded later on, you can put that in the indirect rate line. I won't get too technical on that piece now. That's something we'll talk about once you're awarded. But just wanted to flag for everyone that because we have blended funds, in some instances, if you're funded through ARP, you only have the 10% indirect. If you're funded under corporate, it will be 15%. Next slide. The budget's common errors. Folks, I can't stress this enough. Please do not copy and paste budgets from other DFSS proposals, and some of you may start giggling. I will tell you that I have seen budgets over the years from the Homeless Division, Children's Services, Senior Services. Don't do that. I've also seen budgets come through where it actually belongs to the Illinois Department of Human Services. They are the Human Services Department for the state of Illinois. We are the Human Services Department for the city of Chicago. So just please, folks, use the budget that is in iSupplier. Also, when you're preparing your budget for the program that we've allocated the dollars. Sometimes people are giving us these very exuberant budgets. Go back to page 16 on the chart. We outlined the budget for you. The budget starts at 153,000. I don't want to see a $5 million budget. I don't want to see a $50,000 budget. At minimum, we should see 153,000. And as I mentioned, please use the budget form located in iSupplier. Don't provide a Word document or some random budget form because that score will be held against you. Make sure you're looking at your fringes. So review your calculations, straightforward. Please provide some description, because what happens is people put materials and supplies and think that's okay. No, itemize the things that you're doing. So if you're doing a training program and it's a particular training program, talk about the materials needed for the program. Respondents was placed itemized lines in the budget. Just there are descriptions. Read the descriptions and make sure you're putting them in the right location. Next slide. The evaluation process. So I will fly through these a bit. Just wanted to remind folks that this is still a competitive bid process, right? So all of you have an iSupplier account, and if you don't, please make sure you have one active, and that'll be covered in a bit. But we evaluate our proposals based on, oops, sorry, somebody's moving the mouse around. We evaluate the proposals based on strengths and the responsiveness to each criteria. And I'm going to talk about the criteria in a bit. Failure to submit a complete proposal or respond fully to all requirements may make your submission subject to rejection. So folks, please make sure you are saving often and making sure that you are answering the questions. The commissioner, upon review of recommended agencies, may reject, deny, or recommend agencies that have applied for grants based on previous performance and/or area need. DFSS reserves the right to ensure that all mandated services are available citywide, provided in a linguistically and culturally appropriate manner. Next slide. The selection criteria. So there's 5 criteria to this evaluation process. So DFSS will evaluate applications based on the following criteria. That respondents understand the target population, strengths, assets, needs, and challenges. Respondents have specific capabilities and infrastructure to serve the target population. So we start with the, do you understand who you're serving and how you're going to serve them? And lastly, just making sure that you have, as an organization, there is a commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. So when you think about the people that are working with your young people, make sure you have people that have, if you're an organization that has multiple languages, please make sure you have folks that have the ability to communicate with your young people. So bilingual, bicultural staff. And I would even say folks with lived experiences. I've seen programs over the years where they have an array of folks that may have been program participants themselves, and that's fine. But you just want to make sure that as you talk about who you're serving, make sure that you have the people that reflect who you're serving and supporting the young people throughout the program. Next slide. Organization capacity. The organizations or respondents will have qualified staff responsible for program oversight and management, as well as coordinators. So again, coordinators, leadership coaches, instructors, to engage with young people in a timely manner. Respondents will have systems in place, support monitoring of programs, expenditures, fiscal control, including monthly vouchering and budget revisions. So shout out to finance people that are on this call and program folks. This is where it's really instrumental for you to work together and make sure this is done on a monthly monthly basis. But in addition to that, make sure you talk about what your systems are. Don't tell me we have fiscal controls. That's it. No, explain what those processes are and make sure that it is done, because if you are awarded, we want to make sure that people understand what the requirements are. And lastly, the respondents have established effective data collections and management practices to ensure data is accurately collected, securely stored, promptly entered, and updated in a consistent manner, and that it is monitored. So, folks, talk about how you run your organizations. Don't tell me I've been around for 100 years. No, I want to understand like what your day-to-day processes are to ensure that you have the capacity to execute this program. Next slide. Strength of proposed program. Now, if you looked at the RFP before jumping on this call, this section is probably the most highly rated section. So this is where you talk about the type of employment program that you're going to provide. So it's either you're doing traditional job placements and or a specialized training program. Now, if the contract is for 50 young people, I used the example earlier, you may have 25 young people being placed in traditional jobs or different types of jobs, and you may have 25 that are in a training program. Or you might be an organization that is going to run just a specialized training program. So you may have an AM session of 25 young people in a specialized program and a PM session. Please talk about what those experiences are. And I want to flag here that if you are partnering, so you're subcontracting the services to a particular entity, please make sure you describe that in your proposal. But in addition to that, make sure that you include those partnership and linkage agreements, and to make sure that you are addressing the needs of the young people ages 16 to 24. I don't want to hear about younger youth. This program is specifically for 16 to 24. And again, talk about how they are going to serve the target population. Folks, this section is worth 40 points. So please make sure you are describing the elements of your program. The second point, as you're talking about your programs, that it is supported by evidence-based practices. Now, we use examples of cognitive behavior therapy. Now, again, I don't want you to panic like, oh my God, I need to be a therapist to run this program. No, that's not what we're saying, but that you have some elements to support young people's success. In the individual placement and support that I mentioned earlier, there's the link. Look at that document, because I actually took a look at it before presenting, and there are some elements that could make your program strong in the sense that you are supporting and putting systems in place to make sure that youth are thriving in this program. And then, of course, we always talk about our agencies being youth development practitioners, youth develop or youth workforce development type organizations, or youth employment placement specialized training programs. Really get into the meat, folks. This is the time to talk about previous experiences, to talk about like the things that you're thinking about to elevate young people. This section, I mean, just overall, the strength of proposed program, we want to see comprehensive responses. Please don't tell me I've done One Summer Chicago for 10 years. That doesn't say anything. Talk about the practices of implementing this program. We also want to see an effective approach to recruiting, identifying, matching, and talk about like how you plan to place the young people. This is the time to talk about that. And then indicate that you will hire no fewer than the anticipated number. So again, I don't want to see, well, I'm going to apply for 30 or 40. I'm going to tell you right now, that will eliminate you. We are looking for a base of 50. And make sure you talk about understanding the target population in our high priority populations. And then of course, please make sure you include those MOUs and linkage agreements as a part of the program. But in addition, talk about that as a part of your program. Next slide. The performance management and outcomes. So folks, again, don't talk about how you've been around for 100 years. Tell me past performance that you've done in delivering programs of this magnitude. So talk about similar youth employment programs or specialized programs that you will seek to align with the outcomes and goals that we mentioned earlier, but in addition to things that you have accomplished in serving 16 to 24-year-olds. So if you have social impact reports, if you have performance evaluations about the very work that was done with young people where you saw an increase in their successes, upload those, talk about those in your proposals. Show evidence of utilizing data. So there are questions in the RFP that talks about like, how did you use data to either change a program or to really evaluate if a program worked or not. If you have that type of information, include that in this section. And then lastly, just being able to talk about how do you collect data. Some of you have other multiple systems that you are tracking as an organization because you have to collect figure demographics or something that you may have seen that made you change a program or either change it to serve a particular group, or maybe it was doing it for more time or less time. Whatever that is, just make sure you talk about how you were able to use that information to inform a new program or just your programs in general. Again, things to think about. Next slide. Reasonable cost, budget justification, and leverage of funds. So folks, we already talked about the budget, but really this section, it asks questions about, do you have the fiscal capacity? This is the part where it also asks about like the audited financial statements. So when you think about programs that you manage, like this is the fiscal piece. Make sure that you talk to your finance colleagues and make sure that you understand what those processes are, because this is what's asked in the RFP. The thing I highlighted earlier, just to think about leveraging other funds that you may have. And if you have contracts that you know that you have this year in 2025, could be from the county, can be from the state. Talk about how you'll leverage some of those to support this program. Not necessarily required, but just another way to show your fiscal capacity. And then lastly, just as you are preparing that budget, that you understand what the costs are of the program and that you outline that in your response. So folks, the overall arching theme is to make sure that you are providing a robust budget that matches up with your program. Next slide. And I'm almost there, folks. Basis of award. So just a couple of things to consider. I mentioned this earlier, that this is still a competitive bid process. So other things that DFSS may consider: geography, service array, language, and ability to serve specific subpopulations. DFSS will make recommendations for contract awards by the Healthy Chicago Equity Zone, balancing program location, target population, and demonstrated collaboration. So folks, please make sure you go back and look at that chart. Of the 10,450 slots, so that's the number for SYEP this year, DFSS will award up to 150 slots to one or more agencies which will implement the peacekeeping activities that involve youth to actively reduce violence and foster peace in their communities, promoting positive communication, conflict resolution, and relationship building strategies. The selected agency or agencies must meet the program requirements and performance measures outlined in Section 1 of the RFP. If you're interested in having your program considered a peacekeeping activity, please check the right application question in e-procurement. Respondents seeking funding from multiple sites in different healthy Chicago equity zones are required to apply for each zone separately. There are 6 zones, people. Respondents can apply for a healthy Chicago equity zone in which they can demonstrate a physical address. Multiple applications by the same agency for the same healthy Chicago equity zone would not be considered. And lastly, DFSS serves the right to seek clarification of information submitted to a response to this application and or request additional information during the evaluation process. So there could be site visits, there could be an oral presentation, there could be an interview by a subcommittee if necessary. Failure to submit a complete proposal and or fully respond to all requirements will cause the proposal to be deemed unresponsive, therefore subject to rejection. Next slide. The selection and transition timeline. So obviously today is the pre-proposal webinar. So thank you for joining us from 2 to 4. Due date to submit pre-proposal questions, February 10th. So that is Monday, folks. If there's additional questions that haven't been answered, and I know some of the team is answering, thank you, but I will also answer some while we're still on. But please, if there's anything, you go back to your leadership and you're like, you know what, there's some questions we didn't ask DFSS. You have until February 10th to do that. The applications are due March 3rd, 2025. And as I stated earlier, the contract, is April 1st, 2025 through December 31st of 2025. Please, folks, make sure you are saving often. If I were you, submit this proposal. Don't wait till the last minute. Please make sure you are submitting. And yes, the applications are due March 3rd, 2025 at noon. Q&A, let's go.
Okay, thanks so much, Evelyn. We have a couple questions that have not been addressed in the Q&A.
Okay.
One question, this is a follow-up question regarding location of work sites in the equity zones. So this is a follow-up question that says, we're located on the West Equity Zone, so that would be where they're applying. And they'll work with a work site in the Northwest Zone that will host some youth. I think the question is confirming that they can have work sites that may not be in their zone.
That is correct. I was going to say that is correct. So think about it, folks. You may be in the West Equity Zone, but you have young people working in downtown Chicago or working at an aldermanic office, let's say on the north side. If the opportunity is really a great opportunity, we're really looking for folks to make sure that they are located in their equity zone and that the young people are coming from that equity zone.
Thank you very much. Yes, we previously responded that we really encourage agencies to recruit from their equity zone. That includes the community area where your organization is based and some of the adjacent community areas. Okay, next question regarding W-2 costs for their participants. Those costs run about $400 to $500 for the agency because but the bill for that comes after the program budget closes. So a question about how that organization may be able to include it. Can they include it in their direct cost for the program?
So the answer is they can. What I've seen over the years is that agencies will reach out to whomever is preparing the accounting firm or accountant that they're working with to do this very thing for them, that they will bill for it prior to it happening. So if they know that the W-2s aren't coming out until January, they will receive an invoice from that company, let's say September. And in the past, our budget terms went through September 30th. So as long as it was submitted within the budget term, then they could submit that invoice. So I would ask that accounting firm for an invoice prior to the service.
Great, thank you. Let's see, next question. Can the budget include background check?
It absolutely can. And so when you look at page 16 at the chart, we give you kind of an allocation. There is still this about $20,000 that we call it the indirect cost, but you can, or I like to refer to it as admin. You can take it from that line. And the question becomes like, is it that you're going through a company that is contracted with your organization? You were listed under 0140. But yes, you can budget for the background check.
Great, thank you very much. Let's see, can agencies recruit you to work summer camp at their agency?
They absolutely can. So that would be considered a work site in-house. We have seen folks where they're running summer camps, or even the young people are program assistants to even help facilitate some of the day-to-day for this particular program. It is definitely allowable.
Do students have to have a social security number?
Yes, they do. But there's a caveat to this. So because this is a youth employment program, young people are required to complete the I-9 form, which is the authorization to work. So for instance, like if a young person has a US passport, which is considered Section A of the I-9 form, then will they necessarily have to demonstrate a school ID and a social security card? At that point, they wouldn't, because the US passport gives them the authorization to work. But now, if the question is, if they just don't have a social security number at all, then unfortunately they cannot be in the program.
Okay, thank you. So they must have work authorization. The documentation for that may vary. If they have a passport, they may not need their social security card, but they do need that social security number to work.
Correct.
Great. Next question. Can an organization qualify to be a summer program provider if its organization's offices are located in the suburbs, but you've always provided team programming from a city location or work site created in partnership with either local private companies, nonprofits, or faith-based institutions in that particular area?
I think the thing to be mindful of, if you are not, because earlier I mentioned that if you're applying for a specific equity zone, that you should have a presence, right? Be located in that equity zone. Now, if you happen to have an MOU, I'll use that, an MOU or a partnership with an entity located in that equity zone, then you could technically apply, but then understanding like the onboarding and any kind of supports that the young people need, they should be able to access that then going into the suburbs.
Say that again. They should be able to access that onboarding without going to the suburbs?
Correct.
Okay.
So there should be a partnership with an entity. So it could be another organization, it could be a faith-based organization in the equity zone that they are applying for. But then like when you think about the program process, like young people should not be going to the suburbs to get onboarded. So if they're providing work sites and they're running a training program, ideally it should be in the equity zone that they're applying for with a partner that can do kind of like the day-to-day of working with those young people. Now, in that same breath, I'm also going to say youth are still allowed to go throughout the city for different work experiences. But I think more of the concern is if there's a central location where youth can check in, that pick up their bus card or whatever that case may be, even though you're not physically located in Chicago, like there still needs to be a place where they can talk or connect with folks, even if it's the program staff.
Great, thank you very much. Next question. Oh, I think this is another follow-up to the W-2 preparation. This organization uses an online service, not an outside professional that prepares them. Other suggestions for how to describe and include that cost in their program budget?
If there's like a help desk, and I'm kind of, I have an idea of what this is, but if there's a help desk, like I would say, like if they could request an invoice for the services that they know they're going to use, And then hopefully they can have like a customer like reference number stating like the cost that they already paid for this cost, so they're not billed later on when the service is actually rendered. And that's just kind of the quick workaround. And if you can't talk to someone like an actual person, then I'm trying to think what else. I'll do a little more research to answer that more specifically, because like if you were working with a payroll company, and I'll use ADP as an example, there's a client manager you could call and say, okay, client manager, you're going to do my payroll this summer. I just want to make sure that you can invoice me now for the W-2s that you're going to do in January. But that's you at least talking to somebody. But if this is just a straight online service, I would say try to talk to customer service, or even if it's an email, and have a confirmation number with the invoice so that it's paid. That's the only thing I can think of right now.
Thanks, EB. The next question also related to organization addresses or program site addresses. If employer partners do not have their own physical address, could they use public spaces like a park or our own space? So I think this is work sites. They don't have their own physical address. Can they use your organization space or a public space?
That's an interesting question. I mean, I think if an employer partner doesn't have its own address, I don't know about using a public space like a park, but like I need more clarification for whoever put that question. Because I could answer it a couple of ways, and yeah, I need a little more clarity.
Okay, if you can add, that individual can add a little bit more detail in the Q&A, we'll try to address that more specifically. Yes. Next question, how does recruitment work if we get youth from the lottery and they aren't in our area?
So the way it's set up currently is our lottery. So if an agency were to apply for a specific equity zone, then the youth would be in the lottery. There's an algorithm on the back end that will kind of map that equity zone to yours. And so, for instance, like when we ask for your program address, and this is why it's important, then on the back end, we work with our folks that are designing the One Summer Chicago application and working with a database system to say, we map the community areas. Although, yes, we put equity zone, but we make sure to prioritize the community areas based on your program address. So you shouldn't be seeing young people, like if you're in the West Equity Zone, so I'll use Austin as an example, you shouldn't see young people from Rogers Park. And the other piece, we will also prioritize the target population. So based on the questions that the young people respond to in the application, we'll also, in a sense, prioritize them. So if a young person indicates that they're homeless or that they're opportunity youth, then they would be a priority in our lottery. So there's some things that happen on the back end, but that's why it's really important for us to know where you're located. And then it's kind of geocoded on the back end, because it is connected to the city's geocode system, which is how we connect our community areas.
Yes. One other thing you didn't mention, EB, youth, when they apply, they can select a community area or community areas that they prefer to work in.
Correct.
So it is possible that you may also get youth in that queue who live far outside your community area, but that's because they're interested in working in that particular area. Next question. Can an organization include links to web videos of teens talking about experiences in the RFP proposal to reinforce aspects of your organization's programming?
What we're looking for, I mean, you can, however, what we're looking for in these RFPs are actual responses, because we are evaluating based on the content and explanation and your expertise. So although, yes, we're asking folks to upload MOUs and linkages and any kind of data reports, we still need you to write out and explain to us. I mean, it's nice to add videos, but we really need you to talk about what you plan to do.
Thank you. Next question, is the new administration's attempt to freeze funding going to impact ARPA dollars? Thank you for that question. We unfortunately don't have information that we can provide in response to that. As more information is available about the implication of any new policy initiatives, if there's information that we can provide in the amendment, we will do so. That is the last question that we can address right now. If the individual who did ask about using a public space like a park for employer partners, if that individual is still on and can provide a little bit more clarification, we'd be happy to try to address that thoroughly. Otherwise, I'm happy to hand it back to Jillian, who will walk us through some iSupplier tips. Jillian?
Thank you, Shelby.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Evelyn. Just a few application tips. We strongly encourage potential applicants to start your application as early as possible and to save it as often as possible. And if you have never done business with the City of Chicago, register into iSupplier, also known as e-procurement, as soon as you can. Review RFP narratives and application questions closely, and remember that they align with the scope and the selection criteria. Use the information in the RFP for guidance in formulating your answers. There is a 4,000 character limit, which includes punctuation and spaces. Each response is allotted 4,000 characters. And please do not use the back button on your browser. You could potentially lose your work. And again, we can't stress it enough to start your application as early as possible and to save it often. Some tips for working in e-procurement: to submit multiple applications for a single RFP. Applicants will need to set up a unique user account in iSupplier. The e-procurement system is not capable of submitting more than one distinct proposal per associated email address. Therefore, you must use a separate email address for each submission. You can submit your application and later amend it up until the due date of March 3rd, 2025 at 12 noon. Avoid the rush and possible mishaps by submitting early, and plan on your submission taking approximately 30 to 60 minutes. Please be advised that late applications cannot and will not be accepted. For any issues regarding e-procurement, please make use of the e-procurement hotline at 312-744-4357. And they also can be reached at customer support at cityofchicago.org. The hotline operates during business hours only, Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. And again, save your application as often as possible and submit as early as possible. Determining your equity zone. Selected agencies will serve the Healthy Chicago Equity Zone they apply for. Respondents must provide their organization's address where they will provide services. Program sites must be in the equity zone in which you have applied. To find out which Chicago community area your organization is located in, please visit the website listed here. It's data.cityofchicago.org/facilities geographic boundaries/boundaries community areas current. And consult Table 5 to identify the corresponding Healthy Chicago Equity Zone for your program site. The first step in determining your equity zone, you click on the icon circled here to type in your agency's address. Once you type in your agency address, you click on Go. Next, you look for the blue dot on the map and click on it. Your community area will be under Community. In the example listed here, the community is Westtown, that's circled. New agency requirements. Agencies must provide articles of incorporation or any amended articles of incorporation. Agencies are also required to submit an IRS affirmation letter, and this is for not-for-profit agencies only. This letter must be dated within 60 days of submission. You can obtain this by calling the IRS directly at 1-877-829-5500. If you are a for-profit agency, submit your original letter from the IRS showing your FEIN number. We require that agencies submit their unique entity identifier, also known as UEI number, as well as the central contractor registration. Provide a copy of the entity overview page on the www.sam.gov website. And lastly, a certificate of good standing letter with the state of Illinois is required. As of April of 2024, we have a new labor peace agreement ordinance, which will apply to all DFSS and CDPH delegates that have 20 or more employees working for their organization. The only exemption is our hospitals. Contractors must provide written notice to the commissioner or her designee within 72 hours of becoming aware that employees want to organize or that a union seeks to represent employees. Contractor must enter into an LPA within 90 days of receiving notice from a labor organization that it represents or seeks to represent employees. You may ask, what is an LPA? An LPA is an agreement between an employer and a labor union that ensures that an organizing drive is not impacted by union busting techniques, including employee retaliation. And in return, they will not strike or stop work in a way that will impact human services. For technical assistance, there is a link to the RFP and training documents on the DFSS webpage under the alert section on the website. For questions on registration and e-procurement technical assistance for delegate agencies, please contact customer support at cityofchicago.org. Or they can also be reached by phone at 312-744-4357. And we also have training materials, which includes documents and videos on the cityofchicago.org website under online training materials. We will now delve into how to enter responses and accepting amendments. Step 1 for entering your response. Select Create Quote from the drop-down menu in the Actions box and then click on Go. This will take you to the application page where you can get started. If the RFP you are interested in has been amended, you will need to acknowledge and accept the amendment to start or submit a response. To accept the amendment, click View Amendment History. This is circled at Step 1B. Next, to begin the acceptance and acknowledgement process, follow these steps after clicking View Amendment History. First, you click on the document number. Next, you click on the infinity or eyeglass icon to review the amended changes to the RFP. Next, you click on the Acknowledge Amendments button to acknowledge receipt and understanding of these changes and then proceed. By acknowledging the amendment, you are indicating that you are aware of the changes made to the RFP in the amendment. Step 3 on how to accept the amendment. When you get to this screen, you click on the I accept checkbox and then you click Acknowledge. Then you click on Yes to indicate that you confirm your acknowledgement of the amendment. Lastly, you click on the checkbox that you accept the terms and conditions, and then you click on Accept to accept them. And that is the final step in acknowledging and accepting the amendment. Next, we're going to go into how to submit your application. Step 1, when you are ready to submit your application, you start by saving your draft one last time and then click continue. If you are missing information, you will be given an error message at the top of the page. Listed here in the example here is the RFP requires you to quote on all lines. So there were some lines that were missing information. So I believe that this is really helpful that iSupplier does this to make sure that all lines are completed, that all responses are filled out. Usually the error messages direct to something left undone in the application. In the last example, the error message indicated that the lines found under the Lines tab had not been filled out. In the example here, the error is about an unanswered question in the application or the requirement section. The quote value refers to your, in this case, missing answer. Once your application is free from errors and you've attached all required documents, you are ready to proceed and submit. And at this point, clicking continue should put your application into the review and submit phase. Once you get to this screen, this is like a summary page, and it's also your last chance to review all of your data and to confirm that everything is accurate and filled out completely. Please remember to triple check your attachments and scroll to the bottom of the screen to see all of your responses. And at the very bottom of the screen, you will be asked to provide an electronic signature. Please be sure to fill in the signature before checking that box. And lastly, you can click submit. Once you submit your application, you will receive a confirmation similar to this on the screen. The e-procurement system will send this confirmation within 24 hours of your submission. Please feel free to call or email me if you desire confirmation prior to then, but usually e-procurement will send it right away. Any last questions?
Jillian, we don't have any additional questions in the Q&A at this moment. Same question is there about using public spaces for programming. No additional information for that. So I think we've worked through everything.
Okay, well, if there are no additional questions, we still have time to submit your questions up until February 10th. And those questions can be submitted, questions regarding the program can be submitted to Eshawn Spencer. She can be reached at eshawn.spencer@cityofchicago.org. Those questions can also be sent to DFSS Youth Division.employment@cityofchicago.org. And for non-programmatic questions, any questions regarding the e-procurement hotline, e-procurement issues, iSupplier, the e-procurement hotline is open Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Their number is 312-744-4357. They also can be reached at customer support@cityofchicago.org. And you can also reach out to me. I'm Jillian Black, the procurement proposal coordinator, and my email is jillian.black@cityofchicago.org. Does the youth department have anything to add before we close out?
Nothing from me, just thanks to everyone for attending this afternoon, for your interest, and we know that there's a lot that goes into preparing and submitting these applications, so we're grateful for your time in doing that and for everything that you do for young people across the city of Chicago.
Okay, thank you all for attending our Summer Youth Employment Program RFP webinar. Good luck to everyone and enjoy the rest of your day.